Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue with part 2 of chapter 10 of the Occult Investigator Real Cases from the Files of X Investigations book by Bob Johnson. This one continuing the chapter dedicated to Harry Houdini and some of the more paranormal aspects associated with him, his loved ones, and now apparently some hell rats. We just left off the last chapter, part 1 in other words, where it had to do with the user in this case running into another person named Pulte, or nicknamed Pulte, and she was about to describe some of the scariest stuff that ever happened to her in the world of paranormal, the so-called hell rats. So let's go ahead and let's do part 2 here. The chapter is again titled Houdini's Hell Rats, and here's essentially what it says. Tony told me that Pulte described the event in graphic detail. She said she could see hundreds of giant rat-like animals with yellow eyes running through the Houdini grotto, squeaking an unearthly shrill. They overran the grounds like a sea of gray and black fur, their heads picking and gnawing at anything or anyone that got in their path. The hell rats climbed trees and overran the stone walls and archways of the grottos, leaving a gluey blood-red trail that Pulte said looked like blood. But the flashback was only the beginning of Pulte's problems. She sat down in her living room chair to regain her composure. Once the dizziness stopped, Pulte assured herself that what had just occurred was nothing more than some kind of dream intruding on reality, probably caused by the stress of her day and her lack of sleep over the weeks she spent much of the night at the Walker Mansion site. She went to bed, only to be awakened around 3 a.m. by a clicking noise. It first sounded as though someone was tapping on the bedroom door, but as she gained consciousness, she could hear that the tapping was coming from inside the wall behind her bed's headboard. She sat up and listened as the tapping increased. Just when she was about to swing her legs around and then jump out of her bed, the tapping stopped and the squeaking began. The sickening shrill of the hell rats in her dreamlike episode just hours ago could now be heard from the walls of her bedroom. She was paralyzed by the sounds and thought that at any moment the disgusting creatures would burst through and devour her flesh. I told Tony that the story was incredible and asked him if he believed that Pulte, or at least what Pulte had told him. He said that from everything he knew about her, aside from her claims of being psychic, she was a normal person. And when she was telling him the story, she had been visibly upset. She's lost weight, gotten very pale, and started chain smoking, he told me. Over what could have been a nightmare, I asked him. No way, that's only part of it. That's only the beginning, Bobby. Pulte got spooked big time, and it wasn't by a dream, my friend. I learned that a few days later, Pulte came late to one of Tony's photo shoots looking more disturbed than ever. She was not only physically drained and gaunt, but she was now acting what Tony described as wired and paranoid. When he asked her why she was freaking out, Pulte told Tony that the event in her apartment was just the first in a series of strange things that she was experiencing. The creatures she had envisioned were haunting her every night at all hours, constantly waking her from sleep. They scratch at the walls, and I can see them scurry through my apartment on the floor, then up the walls, but they don't go into holes. They're huge and could never fit. They go right through the ceiling and through the medicine cabinet mirror, almost like they're invisible, Tony. I'm not losing my mind. They really are haunting me, she told him. The story was still hard to take, and although I was always enjoying visiting with Tony, we had been talking for the better part of an hour. My unlimited minutes were beginning to add up. I started to politely end the conversation when Tony said, "Hold on, buddy. I know this story sounds wild, but listen to what happened next." So what happened? Pulte sounds like she has some problem, but where's the paranormal part? Come in. She had rat bites on her arms, huge ones. I saw them. And her doctor, who's my doctor too, confirmed it. She had to get rabies shots and everything. She said the rats from her dreams bit her. And the crazy part is that she insists the rats are ghost rats from hell, Tony said. He went on to add that Pulte had told him that during one of her more intense psychic episodes at the Walker ruins, she began getting flashes of the magician conducting a ceremony that she had first thought was nothing more than one of his magical performances. But as she saw more, she realized that it wasn't Houdini at all, but another man, dressed in a red robe robe with a white hood who appeared to be holding a gray animal by its hind legs over a pit in a stone grotto. Pulte claimed that the more times she visited the ruins, the more intense her vibes became, to the point where she could not resist going there every night. She was frightened that somehow she had opened the doorway to the afterlife through a gateway that exists on the Walker site that may have been some kind of sacred, perhaps evil, magical sanctuary. She thought that her relentless attempts to contact Houdini might have inadvertently opened the pathway to reach other spirits that inhabited the ground. She was convinced that she had stumbled on a vortex between this world and the next, and the rats, the hell rats, were guardians of the vortex and protected it from intruders. So Pulte thinks the rats identify her as an intruder and are warning her to stay away, I asked. Yep, that's what she thinks. She's terrified that they will haunt her until she goes mad or dies. She can describe them to a T. She said they are as big as a raccoon, but with larger heads and sharp pointy faces, a cross between a possum and a giant rat. But what's her proof, I asked, this time insisting on a clincher to the tail. As a matter of fact, she has pictures, he said. Okay, so now I was hooked. And I told Tony to have Pulte contact me if she was interested in having the help of X Investigations. Perhaps we could flush out any possible paranormal event or haunting that may have been affecting her life since her contact at the Walker grounds. I reminded Tony that my associate Silvana is a sensitive who possesses ultra-psychic abilities and can often feel things the way Pulte claims she did. But Tony said Pulte was much too disturbed to bring anyone else into her situation, and that the only reason she had told him about it was that they had a mutual acquaintance in their physician, and because she had confided in Tony about her Houdini house fascination even before the bizarre events began. Coupled with the fact that Pulte did not have much money to spend on paranormal assistance, Tony was confident that the model wouldn't ask for our help. But he suggested if I was really interested, I could always take a trip out to Los Angeles and stay with him. And of course, while I was there, I could take a ride over to the Walker grounds myself and check it out. I know you're fascinated with Houdini. Now's your chance to see where he hung out and maybe bust some ghosts while you're at it, Tony said convincingly. He added, yeah, and you can bring Silvana along with you too. There's plenty of room here. Oh, so that's it. You want to see Silvana again, don't you? I said. Tony had a thing for my sidekick ever since he had met her on one of his trips back to New York to visit relatives, but I couldn't blame him for requesting her presence. Silvana is a beauty, tall, curvy, with long black hair and striking dark features, and Tony was always looking for women like Silvana to photograph. When she wears her signature leather Catwoman jumpsuit, she looks like a cross between a comic book superheroine and Elvira. Don't tell me you made up this whole story just to get Silvana to take her clothes off, I asked snidely. Nah, this is the real deal for your kind of business. You'll find some spooks at that place for sure. And tell Silvana to bring her bikini, Tony responded. Tony lived in a proper feng shui Japanese-style house in Sherman Oaks, a well-to-do section of the San Fernando Valley. Silvana and I arrived on a Saturday afternoon, and after a good New York Italian meal, Tony suggested that we head over to the Walker grounds and take a look. Pulte declined Tony's invitation to meet us, partly out of embarrassment and partly due to what Tony described as her apprehension about bringing any more of the wrath of the hell rats down on her. Pulte's mental state was very fragile, and the last thing we wanted to do was force an investigation on someone who's disturbed. And in any investigation that involves hauntings or possessions, we will first scout out the affected areas to be sure we know how to proceed with the case. Although new technology has decreased much of the bulk of the typical Ghostbuster paraphernalia, there are still a number of pieces of electronic equipment and connections that must be applied to capture proof of an entity or event. We also knew that this was an outdoor situation, so it would require special infrared lighting and scopes, along with super sensitive listening devices. More important, X Investigation's most valuable and indispensable scouting device is not a piece of equipment at all, but Silvana's very human psychic gift. So with nothing more than directions from Pulte to the Walker ruins and Silvana's fine-tuned mind, we made the trip over the hill just as dusk was settling over the city of angels. I was shocked. I had expected to see a house on top of the embankment that was described in historical Los Angeles literature, But what was standing at the corner of Coldwater Canyon was a shell. From the street, all that could be clearly seen were the surrounding stone walls and the paths that led up a steep hill towards the back of the house. On our trip over, Tony had told us some of the legends of the Houdini house. However, he hadn't known that Houdini never actually lived there, about secret passageways that ran under the property across the road and into what was then film star Fatty Arbuckle's home. Tony said the two celebrities used to run concurrent parties, shuttling guests, usually enjoins, between their soirees. We parked the car as inconspicuously as we could. I thought to myself that Pulte might have been doing plenty of sneaking around to be able to visit the grounds so often and to stay there overnight, at least on a number of occasions. Most of the accessible property could easily be seen from the roadside, so entry and exit were not hidden. But it fit with LA's reputation of people ignoring pedestrians. No one walks in LA, and those who do are virtually invisible. We took along a few flashlights and, after being stopped in our tracks by some barking dogs from a neighboring property, we continued on and climbed a small wall about 3 feet high on one side of the lot. Despite the car headlights from the nearby road, most of the hill in front of us was dark, and we needed the flashlights just to see our footsteps in front of us. Silvana noted that the brush smelled deeply of lilac and roses. Her sense of smell was as good as her sixth sense, and the further we walked up the hill, the more we could smell the fresh, wet earth. I pointed out to our scouting party that there was a distinct animal odor on the hill, reminiscent of a wet dog. Tony told us there are a number of different kinds of animals, especially coyotes and possums, that come down from the mountains and run through the area foraging for food. When we got closer to the top of the hill, I could see the outline of the stone arch Pulte had described to Tony. I said to Silvana that it looked like we were headed in the right direction, and I asked her to try to pick up any disturbances. Wasting no time, she sat down on a nearby rock, lowered her head, and began to meditate. Tony and I no doubt looked quite silly standing in the darkness holding flashlights on each other as Silvana went deep into her mind, but I whispered to him that this was the way we'd find out if the grounds were really haunted. My boyhood pal was becoming obviously apprehensive at the prospect of seeing or hearing real ghosts. He shuffled back and forth, saying that maybe we should leave before the police found us trespassing. I didn't see any signs, Tony. Are you just a little nervous now that we're entering the afterlife? A little bit scared of ghosts, are you, big guy? I said sarcastically, looking to get a rise out of my friend. By this time, Silvana had cleared her mind and was completely tuned to the surrounding area. Before I asked her any questions, I shone the flashlight toward her. After working closely with Silvana for so many years, I could always tell by her facial expression whether there was any reason for concern. She would squint and lower her head a few inches. When things were really worrisome, she joined her hands in sort of a fisted prayer clench. As I raised the beam of light from her knees upward, I saw the telltale fist, the lowered tilt of her head, and her squint. "It's bad, Silvana?" I asked. "Robert, there is something here to be afraid of. The energy is old and it has sinned greatly. We are not wanted here. I do not believe the presence wants any living thing to set foot on these grounds again. There has been much death and suffering, so much so that the earth has been scorched so it could be cleansed," Silvana said. The word scorched made me remember that the 1959 fire that destroyed the building might have been deliberately set in an effort to purify some decadent and blasphemous history surrounding the Walker Mansion and Houdini's old haunt. But before I could explain my hypothesis, Silvana suggested that we leave that very moment. Before I could respond to her plea, Tony was trotting down the hill 10 feet ahead of us. Silvana followed him, but I stayed a few minutes longer and directed the flashlight beam towards the top of the hill and the stone archway. I was sure this was the archway Pulte had described to Tony, so I wanted to have some navigational bearing in my mind for our next visit to the ruins. The case now had some real meat to it in my mind, and I was convinced that there was further merit to continue the paranormal investigation. We arrived back at Tony's home close to 11:30 that night. It seemed uncommonly cold and damp for LA, but Tony assured me that the hills get a lot cooler than most people think. "Maybe we have brought some dead spirits with us to make the air cold," Silvana quipped. Please, I've had enough cold bodies in this house, and I don't mean dead ones either, Tony shot back at her. We all decided that the Walker property reeked of some odd presence. Silvana absolutely sensed something amiss. My gut feeling said there was a case to be pursued, and even Tony, who was a complete civilian in the paranormal world, agreed that there was a spooky feel about the grounds that made him feel very uncomfortable and unwanted. We also agreed that there was a strong possibility that Pulte was experiencing some odd manifestations as a result of her obsession with the area. Silvana pointed out that gifted people like herself and possibly Pulte have an advantage over others in accessing another dimension or the spirit world by virtue of their inherent power. It's like having a key to the lock before you even know what door to open, she explained. And when these extrasensory types are intent on something or someone specific, all hell can break loose. They can literally open the door so wide that they let in the whole ghostly neighborhood. Before we contacted Pulte, I decided that Silvana and I would do another preliminary investigation to the site to confirm our suspicions. If we had positive results, we could then ask Pulte to join us in a concerted attempt to bust whatever was troubling Pulte's life. If she had inadvertently released some malevolent beings, she would not be held responsible. If we had purposely released them, then we'd have to convince her to try to send them back. But our first mission was to get some hard evidence to present to her. Armed with a series of recorders, cameras, and electronic metering devices, Silvana and I loaded Tony's SUV the next evening and bid him a good night as we pulled out of his driveway on our way to the Walker ruins. We parked in the same secluded area and trudged up the same path as the night before. Silvana said that she was sensing the same dreadful vibes, and because she had already made psychic connections, she was experiencing them without the need to meditate. They are powerful, Robert, she said as we got closer to the grotto archway at the top of the hill. Be very careful. I'm feeling the badness, the sad blackness, she warned as I shone the flashlight upward. As much as I admired Silvana's psychic power and appreciated her immeasurable value to our team, I was often glad that I couldn't feel the many conflicting emotions and malevolent thoughts she could tune in to because of her ESP. She would often leave an event completely drained and so upset that she would tell me I didn't know or didn't want to know what she had just experienced. From her apparent apprehension as we approached the archway, I knew this was one of those times that Silvana wished she was simply normal. She helped me set up some of their cameras and lights and pleaded, please hurry, the police may come. I said, what, are you getting like Tony? What are you afraid of? Silvana shook her head, a signal that we should get the hell out of there fast. Within 15 minutes, we snapped some photos, checked our meters, and recorded all of the ambient sounds. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except a sudden spike in our Gauss meter that registered a significant change in the electromagnetic field in the area. I discounted it as a reaction to the camera flash that went off at the same moment. So heeding Silvana's plea, we quickly packed up and left the Walker property the same way that we entered it, curious, but with no real evidence. That's what I first thought. The next morning, we had the luxury of using Tony's darkroom in his photography studio to develop the film we had shot. Most of the photos of the surrounding area showed unkempt bush, dirt roads, and stone ruins. We had taken at least 30 photos of the hilltop archway, some of it alone, some of me standing underneath to give a point of reference. As we looked over the shots, we were happy to see that the quality was excellent, but dismayed as to the lack of anything that we could consider evidence of the paranormal. Tony came in and looked over our shoulders at the drying prints. He asked if we got anything good last night, and I said, not really, just some good shots of Houdini's old West Coast haunt. Just then, Tony took out his loupe, a professional magnifying piece for photo slides. He pressed the loupe down onto one of the prints and said, holy blank. What do you see? I asked. You mean you didn't see this? See what? I asked again, and then took the loupe from his hand, bending down to take a closer look at what he was talking about. I pressed the loupe down onto the still damp photo, and what I saw caused my eyes to widen in disbelief. In one of the photos taken of me standing under the stone archway, an animal's head seemingly embedded onto the stone can clearly be seen peering down at me. The creature looked exactly as Pulte had described it. The head was gray and black and had a long pointed face like a rat's. The beady coal black eyes stared down at me from the top of the arch as though it was warning me to stay away. Neither I nor Savannah had seen anything in real time as we took the photograph, but there in the actual print we had proof of the existence of Polte's hell rats. Polte didn't need to see the proof. We weren't able to meet with her in LA, so we phoned her when we arrived back in New York. She said that she wasn't surprised about what we had seen in the photo and that we should be thankful that the picture was the only manifestation of the hell rat that intruded on our lives. She told me mournfully, I pushed it. I tried to communicate with entities that live in that area who simply don't want to be disturbed. I don't know if Houdini's ghost had anything to do with it or not, but the place is definitely haunted by dozens, maybe hundreds of spirits, some that are not so pleasant. Don't you think it's odd that they never conduct the annual Halloween seance anymore? I won't go back, and I suggest you stay away too. After all, we have been warned. And then that's it. That's everything associated with Chapter 10, Houdini's Hell Rats, from Occult Investigator, Real Cases from the Files of X-Investigations by Bob Johnson. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that ending here. First off, a rather ambiguous ending, meaning there wasn't no real resolution. The hauntings were there. They stayed there. They took a hold of Polte and then the rest of the crew there, like Savannah and the main author. And then they continue to stay there. So there doesn't seem to be like any real resolution there. Plus, we never found out if Polte, who was suffering, according to the chapter, those nightly visits from the hell rats, we never found out as those stopped afterward. One presumes that they did. I couldn't help but read that the simplest answer was, as she said at the end, was to not keep pushing it. It seemed like those trips that she was taking on an almost nightly basis for weeks on end, there she was visiting a location that clearly the ghosts and the hell rats and whomever, maybe Houdini himself, didn't want her to be at. But she kept going there. She kept even staying overnight. And so finally it looks like they resorted to having those hell rats visit her and do so on a nightly basis. But I get the impression again that it was almost like a second warning, a more serious one, but one that was finite, one that could finish as soon as she in turn stopped going there too. After all, it ended with her saying, I suggest you stay away too, which makes it seem like she in turn was doing that as well. So fingers crossed, hopefully Polte is okay and she doesn't have anything bad happen to her afterward. Also, there was very little resolution as to who those hell rats were from. There was talk about this dark energy there at that location, but who was it from? Something was released apparently. Was it done by Polte? Who knows? Was it there before? Who knows? But who was it? What was it? It makes it seem like it wasn't Houdini, but it could have been something else. So again, lack of resolution on that part. And maybe, who knows, there might be another update to that. I wish there could have been photographs, actual printed ones within the chapter. That way we could see that giant rat looking down at the main author, at the same time showcasing again some kind of proof on the world of the paranormal, but nothing listed there as well. So overall, interesting chapter. I can totally get the impression too about wanting to stay at a location that's extremely haunted, but also getting told to unceremoniously get the hell out by whatever those ghosts are there. That happened to me in Tyler, Texas, there at Camp Ford. There's a ghost slash entity slash something there with red eyes. It's been told that if you see those red eyes there, that's your warning. That's your warning to get out. It's whatever is there has tolerated you enough, and at that point, it's gone. Like you better be gone. And so I saw those red eyes. Me and the tour guide we were with, we saw them. It was pretty neat. That was one of the few times I've seen actual real paranormal physical evidence right in front of me. Usually that other stuff is captured on video or on photograph, but no, this was live. I got to see this right then and there. So interesting stuff. So I know totally the feeling about Polte wanting to continue to stay there, but you know, bad things happen afterwards. But let me know what you guys think. Post those comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.